North Atlantic. December 1943. The sea was alive with fury. Waves rose like black cliffs, swallowing the horizon, and even the wind screamed in confusion. Somewhere in that chaos, a lone German U-boat surfaced, its deck pitching violently as water crashed over its conning tower. Through a drenched periscope lens, an officer spotted her, an American destroyer escort plowing through the storm, guns steady, radar mast unshaken. Every swell that should have thrown it off balance barely moved it. Its turrets tracked smoothly, its rangefinders locked, as if the entire ship floated inside a calm, invisible cage. The U-boat commander lowered his binoculars, muttering to himself, "Impossible. No ship can aim in that sea." But the destroyer could. Deep inside its hull, far below the storm, a silent metal sphere spun at thousands of revolutions per minute. A gyroscope so precise it could command steel to defy gravity. It didn't fire shells. It didn't track planes. It did something far more powerful. It made chaos obey, and long before the war was over, German scientists would discover that America's deadliest weapon wasn't armor or artillery. It was balance itself. At the dawn of the 20th century, ships were still slaves to the sea. Even the most advanced dreadnought could be rendered useless by a storm. Its guns unable to aim, its compasses spinning wildly under the pull of iron hulls. Navigation was half science, half prayer. But in 1908, an American inventor named Elmer Ambrose Sperry began changing that forever. He believed that motion itself could be controlled, not resisted but balanced. His idea was deceptively simple: a spinning mass mounted freely in 3 axes that resisted any change to its orientation. It was the gyroscope, a mechanical compass immune to magnetism, to motion, to chaos. By 1911, Sperry's device was tested aboard the U.S. Navy's USS Delaware. The results were stunning. Where magnetic compasses faltered under heavy steel, the Sperry gyrocompass remained rock-steady, guiding the ship with mathematical precision. The Navy adopted it immediately, and with it began an American romance with stability, one that would soon reshape warfare. Through the 1920s and 30s, the Sperry Corporation refined its designs. Gyros evolved from navigational aids into control systems, stabilizing guns, torpedoes, and even aircraft instruments. Each improvement shared the same principle. When the world moved, the gyro resisted. It didn't panic, didn't sway, it simply held its truth. This resistance became the core of a new doctrine. To American naval engineers, the future of war at sea wasn't brute force. It was control. A fleet that could hold its bearings in storms could outfight any enemy, no matter the waves. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Germany was perfecting an opposite philosophy. The Kriegsmarine, heir to Prussian tradition, prized precision over adaptability. Their ships were marvels of metallurgy, instruments of exact engineering, designed to perform flawlessly in calm waters and calculated conditions. But they were rigid, both in design and doctrine. The Americans, by contrast, were designing for chaos. Their ships could roll, pitch, and still fight. Their gunnery systems didn't just account for motion, they anticipated it. By the late 1930s, the U.S. Navy had quietly transformed its vessels into floating laboratories of mechanical balance. Every battleship carried Sperry gyros deep in its hull, spinning in air-sealed chambers, feeding data to automatic fire control computers that adjusted gun elevation in real time. The crew didn't see them. They barely heard them. But those silent, whirring machines were the difference between a shell that missed by miles and one that struck its mark through a hurricane. When war came in 1941, the world watched American steel meet German precision. The Germans believed their optics and engineering unmatched, but in the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the frozen Arctic seas, something else determined victory: balance. While German ships struggled to align their guns in storm conditions, American destroyers and cruisers kept firing, their radar locks unbroken, their turrets stabilized by invisible hands. The secret was not in the gunners, nor even in the radars. It was in the gyros beneath them, whispering constant correction to every movement of the ship. And soon, even aircraft would learn to rely on them. By 1942, American pilots trained with gyro-stabilized gun sights and autopilots derived from naval technology. In less than a decade, Sperry's quiet spinning wheel had become the unseen nerve of an entire military. As war expanded into every ocean, Germany's naval observers began to take note. Reports from U-boat captains spoke of destroyers that could maintain firing solutions through rolling seas, their aim unaffected by wind or wave. It didn't seem possible, but it was, because deep inside those ships, steel was no longer at the mercy of water. It had learned to fight back through equilibrium. And soon, that invisible mastery would meet the test of total war. By the late 1930s, the world's great navies were defined by their philosophy. For Britain and Germany, victory lay in firepower and armor. For Japan, it lay in speed and surprise. But for America, shaped by vast oceans and unpredictable storms, the foundation of power lay in control. This belief shaped everything that followed. American engineers looked not at the cannon's barrel, but at the deck beneath it. They asked the question few others did. What use is the strongest gun if the ship beneath it can't stay still? The answer came in the form of the Sperry Gyrostabilizer, a machine capable of counteracting roll itself. Installed deep inside the hull, its spinning mass detected motion instantly and pushed back, shifting hydraulic fins and rudders to steady the vessel. It didn't stop waves. It simply taught the ship how to stand its ground. The first experiments took place in the interwar years aboard smaller craft, then scaled to larger destroyers and cruisers. When engineers observed the decks remain level in rough water, they realized they'd found something revolutionary: mechanical balance that worked faster than any human reflex. By 1939, the United States possessed a fleet uniquely prepared for motion. While other navies trained gunners to time their shots between rolls, American ships let their machines calculate everything. Inside a destroyer's combat information center, a network of gyros fed continuous data to fire control computers. These analog devices, filled with gears and dials, automatically adjusted for roll, pitch, and target distance. It was a marriage of physics and automation years ahead of its time. When the war began, the benefits became impossible to ignore. At sea, accuracy was everything. Even a fraction of a degree off target could send a shell miles astray. The Germans, masters of engineering, built their rangefinders with exquisite optical precision, but their system assumed a stable platform. In combat, the Atlantic never cooperated. In storm or swell, U-boat periscopes pitched, and surface guns wavered. But the Americans fought as if the sea didn't exist. During early Atlantic convoy battles in 1942, British and German observers noticed that U.S. escorts kept perfect firing arcs despite monstrous seas. Radar antennas remained level. Shells tracked through fog with uncanny precision. The reports puzzled German analysts. They assumed new gunnery optics, or perhaps electronic fire control. But the answer lay below decks, in the quiet hum of spinning metal spheres, keeping equilibrium inside chaos. The Sperry gyrocompass gave the ship its unerring sense of direction. The gyro stabilizer kept its guns and radar level, and together, they gave the U.S. Navy something no one else had: predictable accuracy in unpredictable oceans. Even the mighty Bismarck, a masterpiece of German naval engineering, was vulnerable to imbalance. In the North Atlantic's fury, her massive guns could not be aimed effectively once her stabilizing systems failed. Her destruction in 1941 was not just a triumph of Allied coordination. It was proof of a deeper truth. No matter how thick the armor, a warship that cannot balance itself cannot survive. American commanders knew this instinctively. They trusted their instruments even when visibility vanished. Radar locks, stabilized by gyros, tracked targets through waves that once made aiming impossible. Fire control officers learned to fight through storms with confidence. "Let the machines hold the line," one gunnery officer wrote in his report, "and the ocean cannot defeat you." By 1943, this philosophy had evolved into something greater, a doctrine of mechanical trust. The sailor's role was to command, not to correct. The machines would do the rest. Meanwhile, in Germany, naval scientists at Kiel and Peenemünde were still trying to perfect gyro-stabilized torpedoes and V-weapons, powerful but singular applications. They didn't yet see what the Americans already understood. That gyroscopic control wasn't a weapon. It was an environment. It made every weapon more accurate, every radar more reliable, every ship more stable, and soon the results would reach the battlefield, where German officers would witness ships that refused to sway, radars that never lost aim, and guns that could strike through storms. The age of mechanical equilibrium had arrived, and it would soon leave the enemy both baffled and terrified. At the core of every American ship in the 1940s was a hidden nerve center, the gyroscopic room. It wasn't glamorous, just a sealed compartment humming with mechanical motion, where massive flywheels spun at thousands of revolutions per minute. If one opened the steel casing, they'd find polished brass rings, delicate bearings, and motors calibrated to microns. This machine, the Sperry Gyroscope, replaced the oldest instrument in navigation, the magnetic compass. Unlike its predecessor, it didn't point north by magnetism. It aligned itself to the Earth's rotation, finding true north with mathematical certainty. That meant it couldn't be fooled by steel, magnetism, or even enemy interference. But its true power lay in integration. By the time of World War II, these gyros weren't isolated instruments. They were wired directly into the Mark 37 fire control system, feeding precise orientation data to rangefinders, radar directors, and gun turrets. When the ship rolled, the gyro detected it instantly, and the fire control computer compensated. The effect was breathtaking. Guns that once had to wait for the deck to steady could now fire continuously. Shell trajectories were adjusted in milliseconds. The mechanical brain of the ship, fed by gyros, could fight through storms, darkness, and even evasive maneuvers. To the untrained eye, it looked like magic. But to engineers, it was pure physics, stability achieved through motion. A paradox turned into a weapon. War at sea was no longer about who fired first. It was about who could keep firing. In 1943, during convoy escorts in the North Atlantic, destroyers like the USS Buckley and USS Bory demonstrated the tactical dominance of gyroscopic systems. Where British and German vessels often paused between swells to adjust bearings, American ships delivered relentless fire. Gyro-stabilized platforms allowed radar-guided guns to maintain their lock, even as waves heaved the hull 15 degrees each way. It meant the Americans didn't fight the sea. They ignored it. A declassified Navy gunnery report from 1944 summarized it bluntly. Rate of fire remains unaffected by sea state up to force 8. That was hurricane-level stability. The result was devastating efficiency. During nighttime skirmishes against U-boats, American escorts could track and fire with precision while the enemy was still struggling to find orientation. Even depth-charge launches, once timed manually with the roll of the deck, became automated sequences, synchronized by gyro sensors. This was the first glimpse of mechanized instinct, the idea that a ship could react faster than its crew, and in that, America had achieved something unprecedented: tactical rhythm in mechanical form. For the men aboard, the gyro was more than machinery. It was reassurance. Sailors described the subtle hum beneath their feet, the steady vibration of a system that never slept. When the seas raged and the horizon vanished, they trusted that hum more than the stars. It meant the ship still knew where it was, even when they didn't. Gunners spoke of a strange stillness in battle, Their turrets swiveled smoothly, their sights level even as the deck tilted violently. One recalled after the war, "It felt as though the ocean had vanished, as if the ship carried its own gravity." This emotional stability mattered as much as the physical. Morale depended on predictability. A sailor who could rely on his instruments was less afraid of the unknown. He could think clearly, fight calmly, and rest knowing the machine beneath him would not fail. And that sense of calm, born from engineering, gave American crews endurance that could not be measured in steel. Across the Atlantic, the Kriegsmarine's scientists began to take notice. Captured technical manuals and intelligence reports from 1943 to 44 mentioned American balance machines and gyro-linked fire systems. At first, they dismissed them as auxiliary devices, helpful, but not decisive. That changed after several encounters. German captains reported Allied destroyers firing accurately through violent storms, something physically impossible without stabilized systems. U-boat officers wrote of radar locks that never faltered, even as their own scopes wavered with the waves. By late 1944, engineers at the Kiel Naval Research Center began reconstructing fragments of recovered American fire control components. Inside, they found the unmistakable signs of Sperry engineering: gyro gimbals, precision bearings, and wiring calibrated to compensate for pitch and roll. One post-war German report described it with understated awe. "They fight as though the sea were solid ground." In that line lay the quiet acknowledgement of defeat, not from lack of courage, but from a failure to foresee that the future of warfare wasn't stability in structure, but stability in motion. And as German scientists pored over those captured devices, one question began to haunt them. If America had balanced its ships so perfectly, what else had it learned to balance? Behind every balanced ship was a balanced nation. The United States did not merely invent gyros, it mass-produced them. In upstate New York, the Sperry Gyroscope Company in Brooklyn became the beating heart of American stability. Its factories ran day and night, turning raw brass, copper, and steel into instruments with tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch. Even the slightest imperfection meant disaster. A single uneven bearing could send a ship's compass spinning off true north. To achieve perfection at scale, America industrialized precision itself. Dozens of subcontractors from Illinois to Connecticut built components for Sperry's naval systems. Machine shops that once made sewing machines or clocks were retooled into micro-engineering centers, each producing delicate gyroscopic rotors balanced to atomic-level symmetry. This web of production mirrored the principle it created: a synchronized, stable system where every motion countered another. While Germany's war industry centralized under military control, America decentralized stability. Factories shared blueprints, data, and methods through civilian-military cooperation unseen in history. It was an ecosystem of alignment. Engineers, workers, and scientists orbiting one idea: that motion, if mastered, could defeat uncertainty itself. In 1944 alone, Sperry produced more than 10,000 gyroscopic systems for ships, submarines, and aircraft. Each one contained not only engineering genius, but cultural philosophy, a belief that technology could impose order on chaos. This technological calm soon shaped the psychology of command. In the early war years, Japanese and German officers led through intensity, quick decision, rigid control, and devotion to hierarchy. American commanders, meanwhile, learned to delegate to the machine. Admirals like Ernest King and Raymond Spruance trusted data over instinct. Their bridges were filled not with shouts and orders, but with dials, compasses, and indicator lights fed by gyroscopic systems. This created a new kind of warfare. Command through feedback, not fury. A ship stabilized by gyros gave its officers something priceless: time. They no longer had to wait for a roll to pass. a compass to settle, or a gunnery platform to correct. They could think in continuous motion, planning while fighting, moving while measuring. This kind of composure trickled down through every level of the Navy. In training manuals, balance became synonymous with discipline. The ship that holds its bearing, one 1943 handbook wrote, teaches its men to do the same. The result was a command culture immune to panic. Where others reacted to the sea, American officers anticipated it. Gyros had done more than steady ships. They had steadied minds. But there was a deeper current beneath all of this, one that carried both triumph and unease. For centuries, the ocean symbolized nature's unpredictability, a reminder of human smallness before the elements. Now, in the heart of war, man had forced the sea to obey machinery. It was both miraculous and unsettling. Some naval officers wrote privately of the strange comfort and danger in this mastery. One commander in the Pacific noted in his journal, "We are no longer with the sea. We are against it, and winning." That victory came at a cost. The slow detachment of sailors from the natural forces they once feared and respected. The gyro didn't just balance ships, it balanced perception. It erased the line between skill and system, between instinct and automation. To many historians, this was the first quiet step toward the cybernetic age, when machines wouldn't just assist humans, but begin to think for them. In 1944, an engineer at Sperry warned in a technical report, "If we build systems that never drift, the men who rely on them might forget how to correct." It was a prophetic concern. Because the same gyroscopic logic that steadied ships in 1944 would one day guide missiles, spacecraft, and autonomous weapons. Each one a descendant of the spinning. Will Elmer Sperry first set in motion. Perhaps the most profound impact of gyroscopic warfare wasn't seen in machines at all, but in morale. German intelligence analysts studying American operations during 1944 noticed something strange. U.S. sailors displayed unusually low stress indicators in prolonged combat. Medical officers recorded fewer cases of seasick fatigue and battle disorientation. The explanation wasn't psychological training, it was environmental. When the deck stayed steady, the men did too. When compasses and gun sights didn't wander, neither did confidence. Every revolution of a hidden gyro built invisible strength in the human mind. A belief that no matter the storm, equilibrium could be restored. That stability, mental, mechanical, and moral, became the unspoken weapon of the U.S. Navy. And it frightened Germany's scientists for reasons far deeper than technology, because balance, once achieved, could not easily be disrupted. And they were facing a nation that had learned to make balance permanent. June 1944, the English Channel. The invasion of Normandy had begun. To German coastal batteries, the sight was beyond comprehension, an armada stretching from horizon to horizon. Its formation so perfect it seemed mechanical. But what unnerved the observers most was not the size. It was the motion. Even under punishing wind and cross-current, the American ships held their line as though anchored to the seabed. Destroyers maneuvered with unbroken symmetry. Their guns tracked inland targets with unshaken precision. Through binoculars, German spotters watched shell after shell land in flawless rhythm. Not the chaotic spread of naval bombardment, but the steady cadence of calibrated machinery. Reports sent to the Kriegsmarine High Command spoke of stabilized vessels and self-correcting fire. One coastal officer wrote with disbelief, "Their guns do not sway with the sea, they remain steady, as if on rails." To the men trained in the old ways of naval gunnery, it made no sense. Every ship rolled, every gun adjusted, every calculation took time. But these American vessels appeared immune to the physics everyone else obeyed. What the Germans didn't yet know was that beneath those decks, Dozens of gyros were spinning, controlling everything from compasses to radar directors, even the massive 5-inch naval guns that pulverized coastal defenses. Each one whispered corrections faster than a man could blink. When the bow dipped, the stabilizers compensated. When the target moved, fire control computers recalculated. Every system moved as one, bound by the invisible rhythm of rotation. The sea was no longer the enemy. It had become a platform. That day, German artillery crews found themselves firing blind. Their own rangefinders struggled against the rolling surf. Meanwhile, the Allied bombardment never wavered. At Pointe du Hoc, at Omaha, at Gold Beach, American destroyers crept within range, turning their guns inland to hit pillboxes and fortifications with the precision of sniper fire. They struck at targets less than 800 meters away, a feat once considered suicidal in heavy seas. But with gyroscopic stabilization, they could adjust aim every millisecond. The gunners no longer needed to time their shots between waves. Their turrets simply ignored them. One German prisoner later told interrogators, "It was as if your ships were not in water at all. They stood upon the sea." This illusion of solidity terrified naval observers. At Cherbourg, captured after D-Day, engineers from the Kriegsmarine Technische Dienst examined the wreckage of an American landing craft beached by enemy fire. Inside, they found a small bronze cylinder mounted to a steel bracket, its interior filled with wiring and spinning rotors. They sent it to Kiel under guard, labeling it inertial apparatus, unknown purpose. The investigation that followed revealed what many had feared. The Americans were fighting with mechanical balance. The device was a gyroscopic stabilizer linked to fire control and navigation instruments, the very heart of precision itself. At the Reich Naval Laboratory in Berlin, scientists disassembled the captured equipment, measuring tolerances, analyzing alloys, and testing resistance to vibration. What they found stunned them. Every bearing, every rotor, every circuit was built to sustain thousands of hours of motion without drift. They had no equivalent. The report, classified, Geheime Kommandosache, secret command matter, concluded bluntly. The Anglo-Americans possess stabilization systems capable of eliminating ship roll up to 90% under moderate sea conditions. Their mechanical integration exceeds known German capacity. The numbers were damning. Even Germany's most advanced surface raiders, the Prinz Eugen and Tirpitz, suffered severe accuracy loss in turbulent waters, up to 40%. The Americans, meanwhile, fired as though the ocean were concrete. The reaction among German engineers was disbelief, followed by dread. For decades, German science had prided itself on mechanical superiority. The finest optics, the strongest steel, the most efficient engines. But now, they faced an enemy whose strength wasn't rigidity. It was motion. Gyros didn't resist chaos. They thrived within it. The more the sea moved, the harder they fought back. It was a weaponized form of equilibrium. At Peenemünde, where V2 engineers were developing guidance systems, the discovery caused a sensation. If America had already mastered ship stabilization, could they also be stabilizing bombs, rockets, even aircraft? The implications were terrifying. A stable platform meant accurate fire. A stabilized bomb meant automatic destruction. To the Reich's scientists, it seemed America had reached the next era of warfare, one ruled not by strength, but by balance. And the first glimpse of that new world had arrived in the cold waters of Normandy, where the sea itself appeared to fight for the United States. Navy. February 1945, Kiel Naval Research Center. The war was already slipping away, though few in the Reich dared to say it aloud. Allied bombers filled the skies daily, their raids too frequent to intercept, their accuracy too impossible to believe. Something, the engineers agreed, had changed. In a dim laboratory, filled with wreckage from captured ships and aircraft, a small team of German scientists gathered around a strange device. the size of a barrel, wrapped in copper wiring and engraved with the words, Sperry Gyroscopic Company, Brooklyn, NY. They had recovered it from a wrecked American destroyer near Cherbourg months earlier. For weeks it sat untouched, mistaken for a radio transmitter. Now, with defeat approaching, desperation pushed them to study it. When they disassembled the casing, silence filled the room. Inside was no transmitter, no magnet, no fuel system, only a spinning metal wheel suspended within 3 concentric rings. It seemed absurdly simple. Yet when powered, the wheel resisted every attempt to move it. The more they tilted it, the more it fought back. To the scientists, it was both elegant and horrifying. Here was a machine that defied motion, that knew where level was, even when everything else moved. They had built similar instruments for aircraft, but none with such precision or endurance. Measurements confirmed their fears. This single American gyro drifted less than half a degree per hour. Accuracy unheard of in German devices. And it wasn't just one. Each U.S. vessel carried dozens, all wired together into a seamless network of stability. The report that followed circulated among the Reich's top technical offices under the heading Beurteilung amerikanischer Stabilisierungssysteme, Evaluation of American Stabilization Systems. Its conclusions were devastating. The United States Navy employs gyroscopic systems on a scale far beyond German capability. These devices integrate navigation, fire direction, and radar orientation into a unified control mechanism. The entire vessel behaves as a single balanced system. In other words, the ship itself had become one machine. Every deck, gun, and antenna was synchronized to a common equilibrium. It wasn't technology in isolation. It was a philosophy of engineering. Meanwhile, German shipyards were collapsing under bombardment. Without aluminum or copper, they couldn't even dream of replicating the precision bearings that made such systems possible. Factories in Bremen and Hamburg were already in ruins. The sea, which once carried the Kriegsmarine's pride, now carried ghosts. But for the scientists in Kiel, one question lingered like a haunting refrain. If these gyros could steady ships against waves, what else could they steady? They soon got their answer. In March 1945, fragments of a downed American bomber were brought to Berlin, a B-17G Flying Fortress shot down near Dresden. Among the wreckage, technicians discovered something uncanny. A small, intact black box bolted beneath the cockpit. It bore the same logo, Sperry Gyroscope Company. Inside were miniature gyros, vacuum tubes, and mechanical linkages. The Allies had not only stabilized their ships, they had stabilized their bomb sights. The box was identified as the Norden bombsight, the mechanical marvel that allowed American aircraft to release bombs with pinpoint accuracy from 6 miles above the ground. It too relied on gyros, not one, but several, to keep its optical platform perfectly level, unaffected by turbulence or drift. That was the moment realization struck like thunder. The same technology keeping destroyers upright in the Atlantic was guiding bombs unerringly into German cities. The connection was undeniable. Gyroscopic stabilization was not a naval luxury. It was the spine of modern warfare. In April, with Berlin burning, the last remaining engineers at the Reich Air Ministry compiled a summary document known as Technischer Bericht, November 1989b, on the role of gyroscopic mechanisms in Anglo-American weapon systems. It contained their final admission. The enemy's advantage lies not in individual weapons, but in the interconnection of systems through automatic balance. Their machines possess equilibrium, physical, electrical, and tactical, which no manual correction can achieve. They called it equilibrium warfare. It meant a form of combat where machines corrected themselves before humans even noticed deviation. In that sentence lay the essence of America's victory. While Germany perfected power, America perfected precision. And precision multiplied by automation, was unstoppable. One German engineer, interviewed years later, recalled the moment of despair. "We were masters of metal, but they had mastered motion. They had taught machines to think faster than the sea could move." When the Allies finally captured the Kiel laboratories in May 1945, they found piles of unfinished notes, sketches, and prototypes, crude attempts at imitation. But none worked. The bearings were rough, the gyros unstable. The Reich, once the Par Berlin, February 1945. In the half-ruined halls of the Reich Naval Laboratory, a handful of exhausted engineers gathered around a workbench. On it lay fragments of captured American devices, gyros from ships, components from aircraft instruments, and strange sealed units with markings stamped Sperry Gyroscope Konatru, Brooklyn, NY. Outside, air raid sirens howled across the city. Inside, they worked in silence. One of the engineers, Dr. Erich Kessler, an expert in inertial navigation, turned a tiny rotor between his fingers and whispered, "This cannot drift." The bearings were perfect. Even after hours of spinning, the axis held true within a fraction of a degree. To him, it wasn't just a part. It was a declaration. The Americans had done the impossible. They had created balance that endured. Their findings soon reached Peenemünde, where scientists studying rocket guidance systems were stunned by the sophistication of the captured equipment. They had been struggling for years to stabilize their V-2s, using crude gyros that overheated and drifted after a single launch. But here, from a naval destroyer, was a device that could maintain orientation indefinitely through shock, vibration, and motion. The conclusion was unavoidable. While Germany had built weapons that moved faster, America had built weapons that never lost their place. This revelation began to haunt every technical department in the Reich. The Luftwaffe's engineers realized that the same principles keeping American ships level were now guiding their bombers with uncanny accuracy. The Norden bombsight, long dismissed as Allied propaganda, was in fact a stabilized optical computer built upon gyroscopic control. It allowed bombers to hold a perfect aim despite turbulence or evasive movement. To a German pilot accustomed to constant correction, it was unthinkable. In the cockpit of a B-17, the bombardier didn't chase the target. The bombsight followed it itself. It compensated for roll, speed, altitude, and drift automatically. That was the true terror of the system. Human error had been engineered out. Captured air crews told their interrogators that they trained not in aiming, but in trusting the machine. The gyros, they said, never lie. The Reich's scientists understood instantly what that meant for the future. If bombs could know their level, they could one day know their path. If ships could steady themselves, submarines could too. If orientation could be measured perfectly, guidance, true mechanical guidance, was now only a step away. The Americans had not just conquered instability, they had weaponized stability. At Kiel, where the remnants of the Kriegsmarine's research division still operated, engineers began compiling a secret dossier titled Amerikanische Stabilisierungssysteme, kriegsentscheidende Bedeutung. Translation: American Stabilization Systems, Decisive War Significance. In it, they catalogued every recovered specimen. Ship gyro stabilizers capable of maintaining equilibrium through 10-degree rolls. Aircraft gyros driving bombsights and autopilots, fire control gyros linked to radar tracking, mechanisms, torpedo guidance, gyros with drift errors measured in millimeters. Each entry ended with the same note. German equivalent unavailable. By March 1945, the report reached the Reich Ministry of Armaments, where Albert Speer read it with grim fascination. He had long admired American production speed, but this, he realized, was something different. This was a philosophy of engineering Germany had never embraced. The Reich had sought perfection through precision. America had achieved it through motion. Every gyro, every stabilizer, every self-correcting mechanism represented a shift in mindset. To build not against chaos, but with it. The more the world moved, the more stable the machine became. That insight shook Germany's scientific establishment to its core. Because it revealed that America's advantage was not accidental, it was systemic. Their factories didn't just produce weapons, they produced consistency. Their machines didn't resist uncertainty. They converted it into equilibrium. When the Allies finally crossed the Rhine, American naval engineers were already refining the next generation of stabilizers, smaller, faster, more precise. They would soon fit into aircraft, submarines, even artillery shells. Germany, meanwhile, had no time left. Its laboratories were in ruins, its scientists scattered, its once proud navy trapped in harbors too shallow to launch. Yet even in defeat, curiosity survived. In April 1945, as Berlin collapsed, a team from IG Farben's Applied Mechanics Division filed one final report. It was a comparative study of American and German gyroscopic systems. Their closing line, translated after the war, read, "The Americans have achieved unity between machine and motion. Their stability is not mechanical, it is conceptual." Weeks later, the war was over. But that phrase would echo long after the guns fell silent. Because in those final months, Germany had glimpsed the beginning of the post-war age, an era where balance itself would become the foundation of power. From the decks of destroyers to the hearts of missiles, from naval stability to atomic precision, the gyroscope was no longer a tool. It was the new compass of civilization, and for those who first saw it in the wreckage of Normandy or the ruins of Kiel, it represented a simple, haunting truth. The Americans hadn't just stabilized their ships. They had stabilized the future, May 1945. The Atlantic lay quiet. Convoys, once stalked by wolf packs, now crossed unchallenged. The sea, once Germany's hidden weapon, had turned against its master. The Kriegsmarine was finished. Its U-boats, once the terror of the Atlantic, now lay trapped in their pens. Some scuttled, others surrendered. What ended them wasn't just sonar or air patrols. It was precision. The Allies had stripped chaos of its power. Every convoy ship, every escort destroyer now carried gyroscopic systems linking navigation, radar, and fire control into one synchronized whole. They could track periscopes through storms, launch depth charges with perfect timing, and maneuver through fog with mathematical confidence. The Atlantic had become predictable, and predictability was death for the hunter. Post-war German records captured the shock of this transformation. Captured naval officers reported that American ships fought as if controlled by a single machine. Submarine captains described their final hunts as hopeless. The enemy never drifted, never hesitated. They found us even when the sea should have hidden us. That invisible precision had destroyed the psychological foundation of U-boat warfare. Uncertainty. When the ocean itself could no longer protect them, the myth of the submarine vanished. Meanwhile, in Washington and London, a new understanding was dawning. The war had been won not by heavier armor or faster engines, but by stability under motion. The gyroscope had redefined the battlefield, just as radar had redefined the horizon. Together, they turned chaos into calculation. In the Pacific, the same principle unfolded on an even grander scale. American carriers, stabilized by gyros and guided by radar-linked computers, launched planes with precision even in rough seas. Their flight decks, level where others would roll, enabled constant sorties. At Leyte Gulf, Okinawa, and the Philippine Sea, Japanese observers watched in disbelief as entire air groups took off and landed amid typhoons without pause. Post-war interrogations of Japanese officers recorded their astonishment. One naval engineer wrote, We could not understand how their decks stayed level in the storm. Their ships were not ships. They were platforms of balance. It was the final expression of America's wartime philosophy. Mobility without instability. Power without panic. By 1945, that philosophy had matured into a complete system of mechanical coordination. Destroyers could stabilize themselves automatically. Cruisers linked their guns to radar and gyros for perfect salvos. Aircraft carriers became floating fortresses of equilibrium, their control towers calculating motion faster than the sea could deliver it. The Germans and Japanese had built weapons to dominate nature. The Americans had built machines that cooperated with it. The effect rippled across strategy itself, where once the ocean dictated battle conditions, now instruments did. Weather ceased to be a deciding factor. Tides, storms, visibility, all variables neutralized by engineering. This mechanical certainty gave commanders unprecedented confidence. It allowed the Allies to plan invasions, resupply missions, and massive coordinated strikes without fear of failure from the elements. It turned logistics, the art of survival at sea, into a science of inevitability. After the war, Admiral Raymond Spruance, reflecting on the Pacific campaigns, wrote, "Our advantage was not only in numbers, but in control of movement, of accuracy, of calm. The gyroscope was the quiet officer on every bridge. By the time Germany fell, even her surviving engineers knew that this was the turning point. Steel and fire had lost to mathematics and motion. In the ruins of Kiel, a group of captured naval scientists examined a complete Sperry stabilization unit recovered from a sunken U.S. destroyer. They turned it over silently, noting the serial number and the words engraved on its side. Made in Brooklyn, USA. To them, it symbolized something greater than technology. It was the physical embodiment of a nation that could industrialize equilibrium, a country that could mass-produce calm. The war at sea was over, but the legacy of its machines and what they represented was only beginning. Summer 1945. The guns were silent, but the laboratories were not. Across the shattered cities of Europe, Allied scientific teams moved methodically through the ruins, collecting the remnants of German research. What they found confirmed what many American engineers already suspected, that the Reich had never understood balance. In underground vaults at Kiel and Peenemünde, they discovered prototypes of gyroscopes, crude, unstable, often unreliable. They could guide a rocket for minutes, but not a ship for years. They were instruments of impulse, not endurance. Meanwhile, the Americans were already decades ahead. Their wartime gyros were evolving into new systems, compact, electric, and infinitely adaptable. The Navy's stable element, Mark VI, used aboard destroyers, became the foundation for post-war naval fire control and missile guidance. In aviation, the same gyroscopic logic that once kept bombers steady at 20,000 feet now balanced the earliest jet aircraft, turning instability into maneuverability. The Germans had built technology that strained to control power. The Americans had built power that created control. That realization dawned bitterly on the captured scientists brought to America under Operation Paperclip. Among them were men who had once laughed at balance machines, dismissing them as over-engineering. Now, standing in the laboratories of Sperry, General Electric, and North American Aviation, they saw instruments so precise that a single rotation could measure a fraction of the Earth's curvature. For these German engineers, it was like looking at the future through the wreckage of the past. One of them, a former Peenemünde physicist, reportedly said during a demonstration, "We built the wind." You built the wings. He wasn't wrong. The gyro had become the hidden muscle of modern civilization. Its applications spread beyond war, into aviation, navigation, and eventually space. Submarines used gyroscopic inertial systems to navigate deep beneath the ocean without surfacing. Aircraft relied on them to stabilize flight automatically, and in the decades ahead, missiles would use them to guide themselves over continents with unerring precision. The same spinning wheels that once steadied a destroyer's guns would one day steer rockets into orbit. But the post-war world didn't see just technology in this invention. It saw philosophy, a belief that balance, physical and political, could be engineered. In Washington, planners of the new Cold War saw in the gyro a metaphor for American strategy. Constant motion, constant correction, permanent stability through adaptation. A society designed, like its machines, to never drift too far from center. In Germany, the lesson was more personal. Its scientists, stripped of ideology, rebuilt their nation's industry under a new creed: efficiency through equilibrium. Companies like Siemens, BASF, and Krupp quietly adopted American production principles, merging their own precision with the flexibility of motion they had once overlooked. From those ruins, a new industrial power emerged, one that understood, finally, that true mastery lay not in resistance, but in balance. The gyroscope had outlived the war that birthed it. It now lived inside every ship, every aircraft, every guided system on Earth. It had become invisible, and in that invisibility lay its triumph. Because while the bombs and tanks of the Second World War became relics, the principle of gyroscopic balance never faded. It evolved silently, endlessly, turning from a tool of destruction into the axis of the modern world. For the men who first witnessed it, those German engineers staring into spinning rotors in a half-lit laboratory, it remained a haunting symbol of how one nation had changed the very definition of warfare, not through domination but through control, not through conquest but through correction. The Americans had found victory not by overpowering the elements, but by synchronizing with them. And in that alignment, they discovered something enduring, a technology that mirrored the civilization itself, balanced, self-correcting, and endlessly in motion. The war had ended, but its equilibrium still spun, quietly, beneath the world it left behind. In the long silence after war, the machines kept spinning, deep inside the hulls of peacetime ships, in the nose of aircraft crossing oceans, in the guidance cores of missiles that never fired. The gyroscopes still turned. They no longer aimed guns or balanced battleships. They simply held the world steady. The war had ended with explosions, but its most enduring legacy was quiet, the hum of equilibrium. From that silence, the modern world was born. Every era leaves behind a philosophy disguised as invention. For the 19th century, it was steam, progress through pressure. For the 20th, it was the atom, power through division. But for the generation that fought the Second World War, it was something more subtle, control through balance. America's victory had not been a triumph of numbers alone. It had been the triumph of an idea, that mastery was not found in resisting motion, but in using it. The gyroscope embodied that perfectly, a device that could remain centered not by standing still, but by spinning faster. It was the paradox of civilization itself. Stability through movement. The German scientists who once mocked it would later help refine it. They too came to see its quiet truth. That technology, like humanity, endures only when it learns to correct itself. That perfection isn't a state. It's a process. And in that endless process of correction, of balance, the modern age found its compass. Every aircraft autopilot, every satellite in orbit, every spacecraft guiding through the void carries within it the same principle born from those wartime laboratories: motion made meaningful by control. The sea that once consumed men now carries ships that never roll. The sky that once terrified pilots now holds machines that fly themselves. And the chaos that once defined warfare gave birth to order that defines peace. From a spinning wheel beneath the decks of warships came the quiet truth of a new world. That balance, once achieved, is not the end of struggle. It is the beginning of mastery.